The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous thought is rarely met with, even in 100,000 countless. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. So that's always a challenge. Well, the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. That's our charge, and that is our challenge in very America. I did want to say that there's a new variant strain of COVID apparently, which does not have the typical symptoms. I've just got this online, so I cannot verify this. I mean, but through a friend of my wife's, and it's coming back strong. So we're discussing a policy here, masking. Well, I'm not sure we've made any decisions in that regard, but we know that we may have to do something. I am not contagious. I have had influenza and pneumonia, and I'm in my regimen of recovery for that. Long long ago past the infectious stage, and I'm doing better. And everybody who was expressing concern about me, I appreciate very much. Also, kind of family emergency that we've been dealing with, not not necessarily for public consumption, but those of you who are interested, I'll be happy to talk with you about it in private or one-on-one. So keep sensitive to protecting your own health, uh, masking when where necessary. I did want to give a little caveat. I've heard comments uh, praising our guest speakers and saying, they were very well prepared. They had a lot of notes. They connected this and that, so forth, and made it all come together and made it make sense, and so forth. And then we have sometimes we'll have a complaint that somebody was not spontaneous enough. Those two are kind of contradictory. You can either you, we like to think that you can either be spontaneous or prepared, and you can't be both. But I wanted to point out that in Zen, at least, the Dharma started out in India. Nothing was written down. So when Buddha spoke, he was speaking extemporaneously. It said he would walk across the monk's hall or the presentation hall and sit in the place prepared for him, sink into deep samadhi, and after some time begin speaking. So preparation for giving a Zen talk, and this is covered in a document we have on the formal path where there's an appendix on giving Dharma talks. It has six different kinds of situations you may find yourself in. In some cases, it's necessary to do preparation. In some cases, it's necessary to be spontaneous and be able to more interactive with the audience. So the real preparation for giving a Dharma talk is in your meditation. It doesn't come from reading, although you can use that, of course. You can read notes and make copious notes and so forth. But in Buddha's day, they didn't have anything to refer to as notes. There was nothing written down for something like the first 400 years, as we understand the history. And then, of course, by Dogen's time, he was on 1,000 years ago in Japan, the founder of our type of practice in Japan. He was very educated and very erudite, had read the entire Tripitaka, I think they said, before he was 13. He was ordained at 7. And by the time he went to China in around 20, he came back around 27. So he had about 20 years of practice there where he was very highly educated. It was Rinzai. Rinzai is very intellectual, koan study, theological riddles, all that kind of thing. A lot of ritual, a lot of protocol. When he came back from China, he said, "Hey guys, we've got it all wrong. It's all in the city." So you'll notice if you study India and China, they don't hit very heavily on the actual method, the meditation method. But when Dogen came along, there was a big shift. That was how he differed. And his success, not a direct success, but Keizan Zenji came a generation or so later, sometimes called the mother of Soto Zen in Japan, whereas Dogen is referred to as the father of Soto Zen. Keizan also continued the emphasis on Zazen, but also did a lot to establish Zen centers and monasteries around Japan. So we tend to refer to Soto Zen. Tozan and Sozan were Chinese leaders in China around 800. Tozan and his disciple Sozan, they're credited with establishing our style of practice, emphasizing seated meditation about that period in China. When Dogen came back, he brought Soto Zen with him. We now tend to refer to it as Dogen Zen, because he's a more contemporary founder. So with that as a caveat, I just wanted to say I've done preparation here, but those of you who are too worried about being over-prepared and you're just going to sit and listen to me read, you see a lot of bloody red notes all over this. So you can tell this is a work in progress. So this will be published as my Dharma Bite in our newsletter. And then the first, it may be published after the first Unmind podcast, which typically, Dharma Bite is about 2 pages long, published in the newsletter. Then I embellish it for about another page of copy to do a 15-minute Unmind podcast. The podcast, we try to keep them to about 15 minutes so you can listen to them while you're driving. And you put series of them together in 4 to listen to the long form for a full hour on a given subject sometimes. It'll take four segments to get there. So that's the way that's designed. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. There are going to be 2 parts today. This introduction of this somewhat new approach to bringing a contemporary approach to Zen and to address such things as the political spectrum that we find ourselves in. I feel everybody's knees jerking. This is a work hopefully in progress, which would soften the blow of being read to. We'll have an interim discussion between this part and the next part, which I will explain in a moment. So this Dharma Bite is titled Election Year Zen, and intentionally so to raise hackles and get attention and so forth. Election Year Zen, just soak that in for a moment. So, and it's because this comes up all the time. I mean, people are saying, we don't even want to pay attention to the election. We don't, it's a big issue amongst Zen centers because we are supposedly engaged, right? But we don't want to add to the chaos. So after taking a holiday hiatus from my Dharma Bite column and online podcast in collaboration with my publisher and producer, we determined a new direction for 2024. As this is the quadrennial election year in the American national political cycle, we feel it is time and timely to address the relationship of Zen practice in particular and the teachings of Zen Buddhism in general to that of governing, and more broadly, our civic duty as citizens of the United States. While many adherents, propagators, and proponents of Zen in America, including some members of our community or Sangha, have expressed a reluctance, even a repulsion, or revulsion, maybe a better word, toward the political arena, we take the position that, quote, you have to say something, to quote the title from a book by Katagiri Roshi, as I did in my War and Karma segment from November of 2023. Quoting myself here, I fear that if we in Zen do not try to address these terrible global realities in the context of Buddhism, it may be taken as an indication or an admission on our part that Zen, along with its teachings and practice, may have finally faded into irrelevance in the face of such intractable 21st century problems. Setting aside for now the quirkiness of quoting one's own prior writing, let me restate the matter in terms of the political climate in general and what it means from a Zen point of view, or at least from mine, informed by Zen practice and the teachings of Buddhism. If we shy away from the current campaign with its extreme polarization and obvious threats to the operations of this democratic republic, as envisioned by the founding fathers, it may be tantamount to ignoring a train wreck, but one that is coming right at us. The Buddhist teachings of balancing wisdom with compassion may be uniquely suited to addressing the controversies of our time, the overarching theme of my second book, The Razor Blade of Zen. As a caveat to those who feel their knees jerking, I do not intend to rehash the debate about the participation of Japanese Zen practitioners in the atrocities of World War II, but to focus, nor any other historical period, but to focus laser-like on the application of Zen practice to the current situation, with some recourse to the foundational documents, what they might mean in the present circumstances of life in America, some 250 years later. As an aside, for a kind of overarching historical benchmark, let me point out that Buddhism is some 2,500 years old, which is 10 times the age of the USA, from which we might conjure an analogy of a 100-year-old elder compared to a 10-year-old pre-adolescent. Indeed, the behavior of the American political cohort, as well as that of most of the hoi polloi, along with the values underpinning that behavior, may be seen as rather like that of a 10-year-old, blithely and blindly in hot pursuit of pleasure and short-term self-gratification, embracing one half of a familiar admonition from Buddha's first sermon, paraphrasing, O monks, these two extremes ought not be followed by one going forth from the household life. What are the two? There is devotion to the indulgence of self-gratification, which is low, common, the way of ordinary people, unworthy and unprofitable. There is devotion to the indulgence of self-mortification, which is painful, unworthy, and unprofitable. He goes on to claim that he has found a way out of this seeming lesser of two evils choice. Quoting, avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has realized the middle way, and to promise that the benefits of finding this middle way between the extremes pays off big time. Quoting, it gives vision, it gives knowledge, and it leads to calm, to insight, to awakening, to nirvana. Close quote. To clear up some of the jargon, Tathagata is one of 10 honorifics accorded Buddha during his lifetime, meaning something like the thus come one. Nirvana is the state of ultimate liberation, sometimes misrepresented as a separate dimension, much like the Western concept of heaven or paradise, being a kind of polar opposite of samsara, the everyday world, suffering. The deeper teaching is that there is no actual separation of samsara and nirvana, the fault being, as usual, in the eye and mind of the beholder. I hasten to add, if this is good advice for monks, how much more so for householders? It should be stated from the beginning that we do not view Zen as partisan in its outlook. It isn't right or left wing, though many would argue the point. And that is part of the point here, that while what we will be mounting in these segments may be technically be defined as an argument, it is not our intent to prove either side of the ideological divide to be right and the other wrong. It is possible that, as we hear repeatedly these days, both things can be true at the same time. This is not to suggest a false equivalence, but to remember that people, according to Zen, as well as modern brain science, actually experience different realities, owing to the fact that our perceived reality is a reconstruction that occurs inside our mind or brain and cannot possibly reflect all aspects, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns, to quote a former Secretary of Defense. that appear as the causes and conditions of any event. Nonetheless, we can hope that by bringing the non-dual approach of Zen to bear upon the dualistic thinking informing the political dialogue, we may shed some light on the middle way, applied to the social sphere, all the while maintaining that any true insight into conflict resolution will necessarily begin in the personal sphere in meditation. To set the tone for the next segment, which will appear in the weekly Unmind podcast before the next monthly Dharma Bite, let's review the opening paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have, which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Close quote. Setting aside the, quote, nature's God terminology, which smacks suspiciously of Vairochana Buddha. This is my Vairochana pursuit. Vairochana is the cosmic Buddha. We will consider the conflation of the laws of nature, quote, with that of Buddha Dharma as Dharma. Dharma also means law, the law of reality. A caveat: for those groaning under the weight of weekly commentary from these quarters, not to worry. A monthly Dharma Bite and follow-up Unmind podcast will touch on the campaign. It is one monthly Dharma Bite, one follow-up podcast. The other 3 weekly podcasts will feature the ongoing thread to translate Buddha Dharma into the contemporary idiom. That is the second thing that I have to share with you today. Set in that direction. So let's stop there, pause there for a moment, and take feedback, and I'll answer any questions you have. I hope I didn't create any unnecessary confusion. Don't be shy. We have one here?
Yeah.
Glenn.
Yeah, I was thinking, you talk about like stress in the political situation.
And we come here to get away from that.
Right? It's mutually beneficial because in some ways when there's more stress out there, the refuge here becomes more attractive.
Very much
for people to come and have some peace, from that. And then from the other side, for people who are practicing, I see it as a time to really put more energy into your practice, into your meditation, and then and the precept, So I see, besides just having an opinion, just really focusing on practicing the precepts as kind of an antidote to the pressure, that we.
The precepts will play a large part
in
what I have to say about this anyway. Just a couple of comments there, and then we'll see if anybody online wants to comment. We take turns going back and forth. Remember refuge. All my past, I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha, I take refuge in Buddha, the fully awakened one, I take refuge in Dharma, the compassionate teaching, I take refuge in Sangha, the harmonious community, I have completely taken refuge in Buddha, I have completely taken refuge in Dharma, I have completely taken refuge in Sangha. But yes, coming here, we take refuge in the community of like-minded practitioners who are trying to sort through all of this and get support from everybody who's here. It's like our mega support group, you could say. But remember, taking refuge, refugo, refugare, Latin means return to. So we're not hiding out from reality. Buddhism is all about penetrating reality, embracing the suffering that is inherent in reality, including the social level. But we're not hiding out here to get away from the political arena. We're taking refuge. We're returning to our original Buddha nature, meaning awakened nature. Buddha was political. What Buddha did was political in his time. He woke up and he saw the way to do this, what to do, what's the right thing. I want to stop doing this one of our political guys. Yes.
Well, that just kind of hit me a little bit. Is this that why do we come? Yeah, it's not to escape, but it's to wake up and be aware of what's really kind of going on,
Mm-hmm.
and not having preconceived notions. I think that most of the time we get fearful because we have all these preconceived notions. Something happens, and then we go off on a tangent and think, oh, the worst case scenario that could happen. But yet, with sin, at least with sitting, we simply see, and then based upon what we actually see of what's going on, then we act. So I think that it's not escaping it, but it does allow us to kind of center on what's really going on and helps us to settle down.
Right, exactly. Matsuo Hiroshi was asked about engaged Zen. He died in, what was it? He was 85 when he died, so we're making 97. And, engaged Zen was a topic back in the 80s, 90s, early 70s. And he said, this is the most you can do. He took the plot. He said, this is the most you can do. You have to think, well, wait a minute. You're just, you're hiding out in a corner, right? Sitting there in your cave. But I think what he meant was, unless you're straight with yourself on the cushion, unless you get straight with your own mortality, your own aging, sickness, and death, your own stake in this existence, you're not going to be able to help anybody else. It's like putting your own oxygen mask on first. You have to be clear. So that's where meditation comes into our practice. We hope it works. I think I can testify that to some degree, at least, it works. I think it's helped me keep my sanity online. Yep.
So I guess maybe John first.
Thank you, Hojo. I was first. Ishiryo was second, and Ungen was third. Thank you for bringing in this into this Zendo teaching and conversation about this 2024 very divisive, very inflammatory election. My question is this: could you share a little bit about what it might look like to you if a practicing Zen Buddhist is out there engaging? And I've heard that word a couple of times. We don't want to be irrelevant, and we don't want to be withdrawn, except maybe sitting on the cushion. But what does that look like if we could have eyes and ears and look externally and internally going forward this year? What might good Zen practitioner engagement look like out there in the government election process?
Thank you for the question. I would like to just refer us back to Huineng, who was sixth patriarch in China. So he's really, really back there in time. And there was an incident in his life, which was published in his they think it's not really his autobiography, but it's the Platform Sutra of Huineng, which they think was composed by his successor. And he tells of one incident where a young monk comes in and does the prostrations and 3 circumambulations around him as was the formal way. This was after he was established in southern China. And this young monk starts expounding what they call the doctrine, something like double vision or double sight. And this was the custom. You would go visit a master and you would bow and you would put forth your case and see if what you were saying comported with their understanding, and in the exchange you would hopefully progress and learn something. So Huineng all of a sudden says, stop spreading that dirt around here. He said, I will explain this doctrine of double vision to you. I have this double vision. I see clearly my own faults. I do not see the faults of others. So I think the first, do no harm. It's like the first precept. Let's see our own faults going into this dialogue. And you have to ask if you take Winong to be fully enlightened person, who's the only person in history other than Buddha who did not have a teacher. We have to take his word or what he's saying to be true. He does not actually see other people's faults. He sees clearly his own. But he sees the behavior of this young monk, and in fact, he just cut him off, right? As if he's criticizing him. So what is he seeing if he's not seeing the faults? That behavior, he's not seeing it as that young monk's fault. How is he seeing anybody? As what?
It's an opportunity.
It's certainly an opportunity to help
for
the
him
young.
to teach. It's a teaching opportunity.
I think some passable answers you can see it as they're suffering. This person is suffering in this way.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the different sides of the political debate, I think the challenge and charge would be to see it as they're suffering. They say there's no such thing as a conservative or liberal. Conservatives are people who want to liberalize certain things. Liberals are people who think they want to conserve certain things. Just different things. So if you see it as their particular ignorance or suffering, you can feel for them. Poster boy of suffering, poster woman, poster girl. But that's not easy. That's not easy to do. Anything further, John?
Thank you for your teaching.
Did that make sense? I hope. Good. We usually alternate with in-house and onwards. Anybody has anything
There
in-house?
were a couple that he already had there.
Okay.
John knew the names.
Okay.
It's Steve.
Good morning, everyone. My focus keeps changing here because the cat is behind the computer and keeps expanding his footprint, so things get shoved around here. Sensei, I looked at your image of Buddhism as the 100-year-old man and America as the 10-year-old boy, and found myself thinking the 100-year-old man is not long for the world, as is my 97-year-old friend, who has done a great deal of good in the world, but will not be around forever. But thinking more about the 10-year-old boy, and what do people say about the 10-year-old boy? Oh, what a nice young man, when he's helping the little old lady across the street, or helps things. And then what a rotten kid when he drops rocks off of the overpass on the windshield as it goes by. So that perhaps our concern in fostering Buddhism in the West is that it goes in the correct direction rather than another direction, and where this really struck me this morning, independent of the politics. If you read the news this morning, a woman and her child drowned in the Rio Grande because the governor of Texas had ordered Texas military people not to assist anybody that's trying to cross the river into the Rio Grande, and federal officials that are in charge with such things were trying to help the woman and were not permitted to do so. And here I thought, this isn't politics anymore. This is people dying because of the manifestation of the tensions in the country. And I was angry and I was upset. And then I come back to what can we do on the cushions? There's very little that I can do about a woman drowning in the Rio Grande in Texas.
Well, let's talk about
What
anger.
can I do?
Let me cut you off a little bit there and talk about anger. Matsuo Kuroshi had an interesting image for anger. He said, feeling anger or having an angry thought is like cutting water with a knife. Some of you have heard this. Forgive the repetition. The water closes behind the blade and leaves no trace. Speaking out of anger is like cutting sand. It takes a long time for the wind to smooth it over the groove. But acting out of anger is like cutting stone. It takes forever for the scar to wear away. So we understand this in the context of karma. We do not excuse behavior on the basis of it's just the victim's karma that's being visited upon them by somebody. Actually, the person perpetrating the injustice is embracing, developing karma for themselves. And so our anger, we want to, the precept is not to never feel anger, it's to not indulge anger. But if we indulge anger, that means we think we're right. We have to be, we're self-righteous, and we could be wrong in a given situation where we feel anger. Anger is typically triggered by something altruistic, where your children run in the street, you're angry because they're in danger of being injured. And so you're trying to protect something that is important and fragile and worth protecting. So first of all, we should embrace our anger. We should not try to not be angry or feel anger about this. But it confuses our thought process if we start feeling self-defensive, self-righteous, and so forth. So if we can embrace our anger while still being open to new information in a given situation, then I don't see any other way of approaching it. Buddhism is not about avoiding suffering. Buddhism is about embracing suffering, including when we're angry about it. But clarity, if we're not going to get clarity if we sort of surrender to the emotion of it, the emotion should fire us up and should give us the energy to carry through, to have the strength to do what has to be done, rather than get in the way of our judgment. Yeah, one in the room here.
There's one direct to Steve. It's a short piece, Steve. I was an activist in the late 80s and early 90s. And one day, John Lewis gave me direct advice to be patient, to be focused, to be quiet, but not be silent. He was advising me when I was about to take on opposition from someone. And I took his advice, and it worked in the way that I could get what I wanted to say said to the opposition. And the opposition was polite and listened. I don't know how much of a difference it made with the opposition, but we talked human to human. And John Lewis, in his persona, was very much like a person sitting Zen. He was very quiet. He was very upright. He did his work in a quiet way. And sometimes he spent a lot of time silent. The first time I met him, he was silent pretty much for the entire time of the conversation I was having with others. But he carried forward his focus about what was the right thing to do. He was mindful of others. He was focused on what needed to be done, and he got it done. Thank you.
Okay, this is why we return to the cushion, because as Matsuo said, this is the most you can do. The Zazen process is holistic, it's physical, emotional, mental, it's integrative. So if we're going to sort anything out, those of us who are trained in the method of Zen probably going to do the best job of sorting it all out on the cushion. I recommend everybody keep a notepad next to them as things come up that are important to you and you're struggling with. You may have an aha or eureka moment. That's what I need to do. I need to call so and so. I need to do this right. So, other people who do not practice Zen meditation, they're doing Zen whether they know it or not, or whether they call it that. And people like John Lewis may be doing it very well. He just may call it prayer. He may call it something else. We have a third one online, Angan. Speak up or forever hold your peace.
Yeah, no, I'm going to speak up. I'll try to control my verbiage. We distinguish, or I distinguish down here in Jacksonville, the difference between our behavior in the Zendo when we're having a meeting and our behavior outside the Zendo. We absolutely prohibit political talk during the meetings. The meeting is a refuge. It is a sanctuary. And I would have to disagree with you a little bit. It is an escape. It is a short period of escape from your monkey mind and all the crap going on in the world. So I guess, there are many groups available outside. We sit at a church, and the church is very active in social stuff. And I tell people, if you want to get into that, go down to the church. There's all kinds of, we encourage people to be socially active, where I do. So I guess my question, if I get around to it, is just what is the behavior that should occur within the Zendo when you're having a meeting?
Thank you for the question, and we're on the same page. I certainly would not launch into a diatribe about something political when people are doing Zazen, that this is what they should be focusing their attention on. All I'm speaking of is my public media, and this I consider a public medium when we have this Dharma dialogue at the end of the sit. I didn't say boo for the first hour and a half here, right? Those of you who are here. So we do have a sanctuary, and it's called Zazen. And you can do it at home, you can do it in the woods, you can do it here. You always have that sanctuary to return to, no matter where you are. But when it comes to the public dialogue, if you go back and listen carefully to what Buddha said, and you go back and listen to the Chinese and listen to the Japanese, they were not ignoring reality, including in the social sphere, which includes the political sphere. That was not verboten to speak about. In fact, Matsuoka Roshi's, if you read the Kyosaku, he gets into a lot of issues around the Vietnam War, all of the things that were going on in those times. He did not hesitate. He did not pull any punches. He did not hesitate to speak out. But the mastery of the language or skillful means that we have to approach it from the middle way, as I said in the text, the balance of compassion and wisdom, right? And so I hope you didn't read or hear anything political in what I just said when I read this first paper. My view is it's not political, but it is civic. It is part of our engagement with the social level of our society. And it always has been. You can't do anything more radical than Buddha did. Buddha said, look, we've got this caste system, we've got all this, I'm in the warrior caste. I have to report to the Brahmins and wage their wars for them. Let's try something else. Let's set up an intentional community where we ignore the caste system. Anybody can join our intentional community. But if you do, and when you do, you have to leave all that behind, and you have to take on this way of living together in a community, right? That's extremely radical. So I think what we're doing already can be characterized as politically radical. We're helping people, we hope, we're helping people to become independent thinkers and interdependent actors. Now, every political system requires that you be a dependent, even codependent thinker, and you have to be a mutual dependent actor with them. We're all going to go out together and do this movement. What we're teaching people in fundamental Zen is the opposite of that, to become independent, truly independent, and not from a top-down governmental system, but from a personal revolution ground up in your own being. That's already politically radical, but it doesn't, and Buddha did not confront the political structure of his time. He set up an alternative. That's what we're already doing by having a Zendo like this. So I think we can trust the wisdom of our own original mind to sort through this and to be able to discuss these issues without ourselves becoming partisan or political. I believe this very deeply.
Well, see, in my mind, after we sit in meditation, certainly that's one function. But then when we have a discussion after the sitting, I'd prefer to discuss things like Buddhist basic teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and all that stuff.
Me too.
Well, in the Zendo, I consider that part of what's happening there. And I don't want to talk politics while I'm in that Zendo. I want to focus on basic Buddhist teachings, not current political affairs. And I would beg to differ with you. If you get two groups of people together and you got some people from one side and on the other, you're going to have clashes. It's going to hurt the overall
I agree.
piece of that Zendo of your Sangha. And I'd prefer to avoid that. Let's go outside. If you want to read a book, fine. You want to write a book about your beliefs, fine. If you want to go to lunch and argue about it, fine. But when I'm in the meeting down there Monday night between 7, I don't want to hear this stuff.
I agree 100%. And this presentation is no exception to that. All I have done here is said in my Dharma Bites published in the newsletter and in my Unmind podcast published online, this is the direction I'm going to take. I'm not saying I'm doing that in my Dharma talks here. I'm introducing this idea. This is in public media, one being written, the newsletter of print, and one being broadcast online. So not to worry. You're right. You're in line with the tradition. In most formal monasteries, you don't say anything in the Zendo, period. You get out of the Zendo before you say anything. Nothing is said in the Zendo. We just don't have the um, access to a large facility where we have other rooms. We have a conference room here. We can go in there and argue if we want to. But we have to have our Dharma talks in the Zendo. That's not allowed in most monasteries. There's no talking in the Zendo.
Our kitchen is actually in the room we use for a Zendo, a meeting room, a kitchen,
Right.
and anything else. So thank you for your teaching.
Thank you. That's why we have two altars here. This is the Manjusri altar behind me. It represents the Zendo. It's always typically in the center of the Zendo. The Butsudan behind that represents an entirely separate building on a monastic campus, and that's where you go and do the chanting and formal services. So typically in the morning service here, we'll do our service right here in the middle to this little altar, the Manjusri altar, because we're, quote, in the Zendo. But because we don't have another building up the hill, as in at Eheji, where you go do the formal ceremonies, they're both in one room. And that's typical of most American Zen centers. Some have screens that you close around the Buddha statue when we're in the Zendo, and they open that up. Now we're in the chanting hall. So this is an accommodation to practicality. Okay, let's switch back to the room. I see your head going. I know you're
It's
thinking.
going, yes, it is.
Well, if you have any concerns, bring them up. What's your name again?
Paula,
Paula. Well,
thank you. I think my concern is that you said something in your talk right there is I'd like to know how to speak it because we live in a world that's, right-sided and left-sided, and I realize that I need to speak it respectfully and with right speech. But
loving speech.
yeah, it's just I don't feel like I've had that answered.
There's actually, I have a technical paper. I was trained in consumer research for new product development as well as design. I come from a design creative background.
Okay.
And there's a method. We're very big on method in Zen, right?
Yes.
Zazen is the main method. There's a method for actually interviewing people when you talk to them. You don't have to have an opinion. You don't have to argue.
Well, there you go. Okay.
So I'll be happy to send that to you.
That would be great.
Send me an email.
We'll do.
If you don't have my email, it's on the back of our white card there, Tauin.
Okay.
And I will send it to you. I've sent it to a lot of people, and they apply it at work. They apply it in sticky situations, boardrooms or family, And it allows you to interview the other person, just pull them out deeper and deeper, so you get down to a level where you're probably on the same page, so you don't have to engage the argument.
Thank you.
Carl Rogers developed in World War II Rogerian technique for interviewing resistant draftees. Where it comes from. Anybody else in the room? All right.
I was just looking at it. It's sort of the same question, I guess. If you should show compassion to the person that has angered you, or how do you do that? How do you other than I guess by sitting some more,
Well, again, it's not about avoiding suffering. So that's a particular form of suffering that you see in them and you see in the relationship. And it may not be fixed in this lifetime. One thing I think that patience is another thing we practice. Somebody mentioned patience. Compassion, patience, what is that really? So I think we can practice the kind of patience that we connect to an outcome. I'm going to be patient with you because this is going to go the way I want it to go. This is going to end up where I want it to be. You're going to be behaving the way I want you to behave by the time we get done with this. And that's why I'm patient with you. But I think the kind of patience that we have to practice in Zen is this may never get better. Like Japan and USA during World War II. It's taken 50 years later, for generations to die off, for us to have now reasonable relationship with Japan. At that time, we were bombing each other, atomic bombs on civilians. I mean, you can't get any worse than that. So the kind of patience we practice in Buddhism, I think, recognizes that suffering is built in, impermanence, imperfection, insubstantiality, or the characteristic mark of dukkha. It's just the way it is. No matter what we do, we can't fix other people's suffering. We cannot prevent our children. We cannot prevent our parents from suffering. We cannot prevent our pets from suffering, and so forth. So it's grief. Fortunately.
Well, I think for me, like Zen is it's a compassion. Compassion is Zen. Zen is compassion. So
compassion means suffer with.
Yeah, and but it's self-compassion too. I think there's a lot of I tend to forget that a lot, because I always tend to be looking outward. But it's like, I feel like I need a lot more compassion than what I give myself. Or,
I
and I think it's very there, and then it carries over because when I can feel compassion for me, for my suffering, in like a relationship with, and then it helps me, that compassion kind of.
Right. When you're in a crisis situation and you have the identified victim or the identified patient, the identified problem, child, all of your energy is directed towards that, trying to fix this situation, you tend to start deteriorating your own health, wellness, well-being, and so forth. So it's been a real lesson this past year, really. I had COVID last year, December. I came down with pneumonia this year. Just in, if you don't put your oxygen mask on first, you're not going to be able to help anybody. So you've got to stay in there. You've got to keep yourself going. You've got to keep yourself healthy. It doesn't mean you have to be happy all the time, but you have to be competent to actually help.
Because like in in these relationships when they're divisive, it's like we're both suffering, and I think like the anger for me, it's sort of like that calls for self-compassion, because
Anger is
I'm
not always ego.
yeah, and so I just wanted to throw in that
So, yeah.
self-compassion and compassion.
Would you have anybody else online? Thank you for the comment, Glenn.
No, Joseph, oh, there you go.
Oh, we did.
He
Okay.
came back. Hang on.
And maybe Keiko. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Heather.
Heather. Well,
Thank you.
know your name, so I can call you. Okay, Joseph.
I guess just to share a few things that are coming up. I really enjoy this this conversation. I guess just in terms of like Zen and governing philosophies, it's interesting how much Zen takes from Taoism, which is kind of the flip side of the Buddhist intentional community in the woods. It really is trying to think about how do you set up patterns that are effective at governing large scale societies and civilization. So with the idea of Wu Wei, so the idea is the prince is relaxed and happy, and he doesn't practice favoritism. He's prudent. He doesn't reveal his weaknesses, and by maintaining that kind of distance, all the ministers exert themselves fully. So it's this principle of acting by not acting, right? By stepping back, almost by sort of splitting yourself backwards, right? That has a lot to do with meditative practice and cultivation, and is connected with Taoist cultivation practice. But
Like Dogen,
it's like this, yeah.
step of Master Dogen, the backward step.
I would make a connection there, or at least I think there's, the iconography of Wu Wei is like a center still point of a vast mandala with like circular, patterns extending out from it. And so again, by standing at the center point and not being moved, like all the ministers, all the forces of the earth around you organize themselves. But as soon as I think the risk is if you have a leader, what's dangerous in a leader potentially is showing favoritism and corruption. And in general, just like not maintaining equanimity, right? Because your feelings are very influential on the community. So I think it's like governing yourself in order to govern. Yeah.
Let me interrupt you a moment. You also have to take into consideration that the founding of this democratic republic, however you want to think of it or name it, was based on the idea of self-governance, which is, probably happened before in history, but it seems to have been a radical breakthrough that people can actually govern themselves. And then all of the checks and balances that were put into place seem to be to manage our lesser angels, understanding human psychology and what we're going to do, given the chance. We have to put these checks and balances in place to keep people from doing that. So to go back as far as China and prior civilizations and their governing systems, I think you have to look at whether they were attempting to be self-governing or something else from your analysis. But I appreciate your analysis.
And thank you for your teaching.
Keiko, I'm calling you out because I know your name.
I like.
Thanks for the tea.
Oh yeah, well, Google made it. I liked the Winan's approach. So you only see your own faults and not on the other, and what the others is the suffering. I think that's a very helpful approach to reflect whatever comes into your eye, that kind of controversy or something that is arising actually within yourself. So it kind of makes you detach from the individual that you feel that you're conflicting with, but it's more of how you process.
Mhm.
And in an ideal world, if everybody could do that, there wouldn't be um like being on sides and to conflict.
Yeah.
And so in a community like this, if that approach and understanding can be shared, it means that people who would be having different approaches, if you call it conservative or liberal, they could try to, you know, digest each other's suffering, I guess.
Embrace.
And that, I think that's the approach in terms of what.
Yeah, if you look at the Heart Sutra, it says, given emptiness, given this realization or understanding, this insight that comes about in your life, then you will see that there's no suffering, no end of suffering. Both things can be true at the same time. What kind of contradiction is that? So my interpretation of that is there's no suffering if we all wake up to this, as you're saying. And what Ishiro or Steve was pointing out about this incredible ignorance and victimization that makes you so angry to see this happening in the world. If you realize that the kind of suffering that can come to an end through this is the kind we inflict upon each other and upon ourselves, mutually and self-inflicted suffering. That's the kind of suffering that could come to an end. Aging, sickness, and death, the biological, et cetera, that's built in. As I said, you can't prevent that for anybody else, let alone yourself. Right?
But we're also sharing it equally.
We're all sharing it. And so it's somewhat mitigated by embracing it as natural. There's nothing wrong with sickness. There's nothing wrong with aging. There's nothing wrong with death. Birth is the leading cause of death. So if death is wrong, birth is wrong. How can there be anything fundamentally wrong? The only thing that's wrong in the world is the ignorance of the human beings who are inflicting all of this unnecessary suffering on each other and on the rest of the planet. That's, I think, is the Buddhist model. And Buddha would be aghast at the scope and scale now, but he wouldn't be surprised. Same thing in his time. Anyone online? Hey, Bree, I'm calling you out.
Oh, no.
No, you're pretty new, so we'll be gentle with you.
Oh, man. Is it okay if I just listen today?
Sure.
I have
Okay.
too many thoughts and I'd like to consolidate them before I
Okay,
speak.
let's move on. Remember, this is an attempt. One of the things I've started developing, Sandra and I have both worked on musical sutras, setting them to music, taking these teachings, wonderful teachings, setting them to music, analyzing them in different ways. We recommend that people memorize. We recommend that you read multiple translations of Dogen, especially, for instance, where you can read what one translator said in the first paragraph and what another translator rendered. And so we're using all of these, you might say, modern language-oriented techniques to try to penetrate to the depths of this understanding, remembering that in Buddhist time, this wasn't written down. It was all oral tradition. So sometimes I will recite one while you read the other. In fact, I'll ask you to do it now. If somebody would hand out the pamphlets that have the Heart Sutra in it, anyone, either one of them. The yellow ones are fine. Yeah, here it is. What I want you to do is follow the English Heart Sutra, which has a lot of traditional language in it, while I read my paraphrase of it. I call this paraphrasing, where I'm trying to put this in other words. In other words, this is what this is saying. Right? And you can do the same exercise yourself. If you take one of your favorite teachings, you can see if you can write up a paraphrase of it. How would you say what they're trying to say?
May I interject
Sure.
something while they're getting it? My project is making poetry called Simple Zen. which takes what he's asking us all to do. I am doing it as poetry, and it is published online on Substack on Tondo Me, and the series has just started, and I have to give you the first ones.
Wonderful. So we think Zen is the heart of creativity. We'd like you all to be as creative as possible in approaching how you're trying to study it. So we've come up with these various techniques. So, Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra, paraphrase. When awakening beings deeply and directly experience the perfecting of wisdom, they clearly see that all 5 components of sentient awareness, fundamentally empty, permanent, separate self-existence. It relieves all unnecessary suffering. Respected seekers of the truth, the appearance or form of reality does not differ from emptiness. The emptiness or impermanence does not differ from the form. The form itself is innately emptiness. Emptiness itself innately form. All sensation, perception, and underlying mental formations, as well as consciousness itself, are also like this. Furthermore, all beings in existence are marked by this emptiness. They neither arise nor cease as they appear to do. They are neither defiled nor pure, but non-dual. They neither increase nor decrease in reality. Therefore, given the reality of emptiness, there is no absolute form or appearance, no concrete sensation, no dependable perception, and no determinative underlying formations. It follows that there is no absolute consciousness. More immediately, it implies that there are no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, and no body as such. Just so, there can be no mind as a separate entity, meaning that in spite of appearances, there can be no separate seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching, no fixed objects of the mind, no realms of sight or other senses, or any realm of mind consciousness as a whole. This means that there can be neither ignorance in the absolute sense, nor any absolute extinction of ignorance in the relative sense. Thus, there can be neither old age and death as absolute states, nor any extinction of old age and death as relative realities. Thus, in absolute reality, there can be no actual suffering, as well as no cause of suffering, and thus no cessation of suffering. It follows that there can be no specified path as such, no knowledge in any absolute sense, and no attainment of any meaningful kind. Since there is nothing to attain, all awakening beings rely on perfecting this natural wisdom. And if successful, the mind can function without hindrance. The implication is that without mental hindrance, there can be no fear. The promise is that far beyond all inverted views of reality, one can realize absolute liberation. All awakened ones of past, present, and future have relied on perfecting this wisdom, thereby attaining unsurpassed, complete, perfect insight into reality. Therefore, be assured that perfecting this wisdom is the great miraculous method, the great right method, the supreme method, the incomparable method, which is capable of removing all suffering, and, unlike competing methods, is true, not false. Therefore, we followers of this way proclaim the perfecting wisdom method as transformational. We venerate this in the verse, Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisvaha, which translates, paraphrasing, to something like, gone, gone to the other shore, attained the other shore, to altogether beyond the other shore, having never left, awakening accomplished. So that's a first draft of attempting to paraphrase that into logical language, or take the jargon out. Okay, any closing comment? How are we doing on time, Goji?
11:50.
Okay, about 10 more minutes. So anyone has anything further to say? if anyone wants to take an attempt in this direction, I'll be interested in seeing what you come up with.
Mine comes out tonight. It's publishing tonight.
Okay, good. Which one did you do?
This one.
Oh, you took the art sutra.
Yeah.
We have a musical version of this as well.
Yeah, this sutra really never made sense to me. It was been kind of I struggled with it for a long time. But it seems like to me, when I think about impermanence and interbeing, then it all makes sense with what he's saying, because everything is in a constantly changing state.
When it says no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, people say, wait a minute, I have eyes.
Yeah,
But if you, as such, there's no eye floating out there in space somewhere. It's all integrated into this total system.
and it's not the same eye from moment to moment.
And yours are not the same as mine.
Exactly. And yet they exist because we interrelate. We're interbeing. So we don't exist independently. We exist in relationship. So the way that we tend to think of our existence that's the kind of the diluted part, right? So
no cross talking online there. I see you guys talking to each other. Anybody online? Ungan, this is going in the direction that you suggested once. You said you thought the Heart Sutra was not good to introduce to newcomers because it's too confusing and talks about emptiness and all this woo stuff.
Yeah.
So this was my effort.
Yeah, when I started my practice, I had a terrible time with the Heart Sutra until finally it was pointed out that the original word for emptiness, the original translations was a word called shunyata, which there's no good translation of. It means something like things are exactly as they appear, except they're only appearances. So when it's in my mind, when it says no eyes, no ears, no nose, etc., all the negative stuff, it's like saying there's none of that stuff that is permanent that goes on forever. Certainly you've got an eye, an ear, and a nose. Reach over and pinch it if you don't believe it. But it's temporary, it's impermanent, and it will go away. So that's another way of approaching the whole thing about emptiness in the Heart Sutra.
And as Dogen often says, all things are like this. Once you begin to get that pounded into your mind, you begin to see that, whatever we can do about the given situation is also impermanent. So it takes some of the burden off of us to think that we have to fix everything. We can't stop trying, but we can't get attached to the idea that we're all powerful. We didn't create this mess. We were born into it, but we didn't create it. I think Steve or Ishidio. I want
Yes,
to call out Abhilasha and Corolla. The men are doing all the talking online.
I just wanted to have a quick reaction to Bill's comment, where Bill doesn't like the Heart Sutra, and I like the Heart Sutra, and then I would expect John to chime in with, I'm sick and tired of all of this constant bickering about the Heart Sutra.
Yeah, sounds like you're forming political parties around the Heart
Yes.
Sutra.
The monks of the progressive hall and the monks of the conservative hall.
Right. Let me call out Abhilasha and Corolla. I see a David we haven't heard from. Anybody who hasn't spoken, please take a minute to, if you have something for us, let us know.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion. I've been hearing. It's very relevant in the sense that, like as you said, like there are a lot of divided opinions and a lot going on. And as one of the I don't remember the name, but one of the members present there, she kind of pointed out, but like how to do it is kind of hard. Like I understand that there are political narratives and we have just given them labels, but things are beyond labels, like there like and there should be conversation beyond just the labels, but those are some of the hard. I think the discussions are also a bit hard because in general nowadays we just don't have sort of time to have a proper discussion. So I think it's also because everybody is in sort of a rush to and it's like they have thought about an opinion because they've already or we have already spent time on it and we have formed the opinion. So it's kind of like that because in my spare time I have spent the time and done my research from some resources that I am used to and I have formed an opinion. So when I'm in a space where I don't expect that there will be a discussion, but the discussion just pops up, then I'm not prepared. Like most of the times we are not ready to have a complete discussion and relearning again at that time, since we have already researched and formed an opinion. We want to, I think like there is a tendency that I become confident that I have done my research and so this is true.
I've done my
And
research.
yeah, so that kind of thing is has because everybody has now access to a lot of material. So it feels like you have done your research and your opinion is, I mean, it's not all, but it can be strong.
I'm
So
glad you brought that up because this comes up all the time in Dokusan and Zen practice. A mother will say, "My kids are driving me crazy. I know I need to let that go. I need to be unattached or whatever." And I said, I don't think so. I think Buddha taught that you're just in for suffering. If you're a mother, you're especially in for suffering. And so just get used to it, embrace it. But what I think Buddha taught us to relinquish is our opinion of it. Our personal opinions is what, and our interpretation of reality is what's getting in our way. We're not going to be able to avoid suffering, but we can avoid believing in our own opinion. And I think the same thing applies to the political spectrum. Now, if a person has a hard, fast opinion developed over years and they're not able to relinquish it, then this is where the interview technique comes in. Tell me more about that. What is there about that makes you feel that way? This is the way it goes. It's like probes, just probes. And they bring them out, bring them out, bring them out. And finally, you might get down to what they're really afraid of, what they really fear. And you might find that you fear the same thing, but you would say it in a different way. So when you start dealing with opinion, that's where I would say take refuge in the non-directive interview technique I sent you. You'll find it helps cut through that.
yeah, I think that there is also the time when we like, although we are having a discussion or a meeting, not particularly political, but in general about in corporate world or anywhere else, we sort of have an agenda, right? We want the meeting, like there are open pockets for discussion, but we still kind of want to reach some ends. And then I think it's very hard, like in those kind of meetings, to be actually receptive to a change of plan of agenda. Like if something comes up and then you just let it flow in a different direction. I think yeah, that also might come with the relinquishing part, but typically for, like personally, I feel in a live environment where there are people present, it's not something I'm able to do at the moment. Like maybe after the meeting, I'll understand and change the course, but during the process, it's very hard to um, change the direction from the agenda.
You take it back to the cushion, you can probably sort it out a lot better. And if everybody was practicing some form of meditation, I think we'd see a whole lot less inflicted or intentional suffering out there in the world. Corella, Adrian, you got something to say?
I have one comment. As a 501(c) religious organization, we're not supposed to take a position about candidates
Right.
or parties,
Or
but we
support.
can take a position in favor of the paramitas of compassion and generosity and tolerance.
Right.
And
As I was saying before, we're not in the business of telling people who they should vote for, what causes they should get behind. We're in the business of providing a conducive space and a conducive program for people to come to a level of independent thinking where they make those decisions themselves. And we hope they make them based on compassion and based on some of the principles of Buddhism. And then they go forth like armies from the Zen centers and take action out there. We're not out there leading the army. We're
I
jumping in
would
front of it.
make one other comment about your interview method. And I think we've known for a long time the generals say a frontal assault is not the best tactic. So
Right.
simply getting in people's faces and disagreeing with them doesn't do anything but harden everybody's position. So what we really need to do is practice what we preach: patience, compassion, and tolerance.
And the non-directive technique is kind of like a linguistic jujitsu. It helps you bring them forth, and the force of their own energy is what gets us to a deeper level of understanding each other. But if you try to impose that, it's very difficult, impossible, really. So I think we're at the end of our rope here. Let's close with the 4 vows. They're in the pamphlet. We chant them 3 times. Anybody else have anything to say before we close?
Oh, Joe, quick plug for our February guest speaker. We've got Shoryu Bradley coming to speak. He comes, and you know much more than I do, but he comes with a deep resume of practice and study with various teachers. And he's going to be focused on the 5th precept, not indulging in intoxicants. So everyone make a note, February 4th.
He and I, he knows where we speak. He and I and a third party went out one night in Austin around a bonfire and got drunk, one beer. That was my fault.
I'm not sure that discussion is suitable for the Zendo. Maybe we should take that outside.
It sets the context for Shoryu's talk.
Thank you, Hojo.
Thank you, John. The 4 great vows 3 times. These are numberless, but experience. You just are impossible. I do not it's the children. This is impossible. I do it. These are my power to bring them. It's impossible. I to them. Darkness are bounds. I to them. The is not impossible. I to realize it. The silence. I to bring them. The reasons are impossible. I to them. The is surrounds. I to measure them. The is such impossible. Thank you for your patience and listening. Special thanks to Gyoji and Kongo for keeping the Zen Center running here. Welcome to all newcomers. Thank you. Contact me for any further